Recording in recording in Would be good for us to help like the providers thing that we did with the boots on the ground people, to let them know what's going on with this, because it's gonna.
Yeah, we have it slated for the provider newsletter that's gonna go.
Yeah, but I'm talking about, like the people.
Yeah, this should be everybody that we have an email for, regardless of level, not just this council.
Right. But Russ is gonna answer questions, because it's very confusing, so.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, so it's just a way for communicating better and getting questions answered. We talked to them for a while on the phone today, Maria and I. It was,
Where'd you get that shirt, Gary?
What my staff do.
I like it. That would, but it says Foley Center on it, so that means.
She got this stuff, and I think this was like a.
I was gonna say, you can sell that.
Someone is. Yeah, I have a celebration of life.
Okay.
It's okay.
I'm the dream man, I'm the dream.
Yeah. How are you? You look good.
Where it says work group update, will you do that one?
Sure, which one, is that, oh, that's for the assessment?
I feel like there was the assessment and.
My social security check every month.
Was it totally random, but it was because I saw the agency.
Two board groups I know is that is the funders / DST and then
Coordinated entry family shelter.
oh, I don't know what that.
It's, we're holding until we finish searching the national. Because we can't find anybody doing it to present anything.
But it also learned a lot. Yeah. But it was a good lesson, and, I guess some things we were doing, because we always did it that way.
But we can mention outreach to veterans,
In some cases came out better, so it's like.
not a technical coordinated entry, but
That's not a lesson learned, and might as well get something good out of this thing.
something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, whether we're in that or not, right? Sorry.
I'll do, I just realized my name's on everything. I'll do case conferencing, I'll kind of set that up.
Okay, I do have a quick PowerPoint for you.
Okay.
Really short, simple, to the point, so yes.
So, I mean,
That way we can kind of alternate a little bit maybe.
Yeah.
So if you want to do rent calculation and the standard of care.
Yeah. But a
If
lot.
I had never. Excuse me. Sounds like it's a station.
She's great. Yeah, so, yeah, my husband. Cherry.
Where it's gonna fit on the agenda, but I do have an update. It fits somewhere, you can add it in, and I'm happy to get it.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Good afternoon. My name is April Watt. I'm the president and CEO at Directions for Living and the chair of the Providers Council. Welcome to the June Providers Council meeting. We'll do introductions We'll start with you, Lieutenant Heish.
Zach Hayes, Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, Safe Harbor.
Jane Walker, Daystar Life Center.
Terry McMahon, Bowling Centers.
Amy Foster, HLA.
Sheila Lopez, St. Vincent de Paul.
Avery Sliker, HLA.
Margie Kishler, HLA.
Good, and we'll start out both back here in the back.
Jay Lamb Robertson, Metropolitan Ministries.
I'm Christine Long, Metropolitan Ministries.
Felix Quinones, Southern Support Services.
Judy Ryder for Southern Florida Services Outreach Program. I'm Kayla Cimarron, More to Life and Open Doors Outreach Network, and I'm the Regional Supervisor. Cassidy E.B. with More to Life.
Have you, and do we need to do introductions for everybody on the call?
I can read the participant list if
Okay,
you want,
please.
that way if I miss anybody.
Okay.
We have Larry from West Care here in Yachim, Jennifer from Alpha. I'm going to assume that's Kevin from Boley. I'm going to assume Danielle is Danielle Husband, Elisa Galvin from Pinellas County Housing Authority, Dee Manja, Susan Curtis, Mark Dufa, Holly Harmon, Susan Finlaudeso, Nicole Leslie, Randy Bergen, and Gabrielle Lopez.
Good. Gabe, do you want to introduce yourself?
Gabe Farah from the city of Clearwater.
Thank you.
And that was Kevin from the Salvation Army, not Bowling.
Thanks, Kevin.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Thank you to everybody on the call. Thank you to those of you who made the point to be here today for our physical quorum so that we can actually move forward with our agenda. The first thing on the agenda is the consent agenda, which includes the April 16th, 2021 Providers Council meeting minutes. Does everybody have the opportunity to read those? Can I have a motion to approve?
A second.
Okay, we have a motion from Lieutenant Haitian, a second from Gabe. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Yes.
She was saying aye.
Aye, okay, good, thank you. Okay, next up on the agenda is the provider slate and application. So I just want to call your attention to the yellow highlighted areas. Just as a reminder, the slate is, the membership is very important. It sets our quorum requirements. We allow both a primary and a designee. Designees tend to be for the larger agencies where their CEOs are either out of state, out of county, serve a regional area, unable to be here, in which case a designee would be able to step in and or be here routinely. The three changes before you is the designee for CASA is Gabriela Lopez. You have that application in front of you. Karen Yachim is now the Director of Human Services for Pinellas County, replacing Daisy, and Major Chris Flanagan, the Area Commander for the Salvation Army St. Pete. So do I have a motion to approve the slate as presented?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
And a second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, motion passes.
April, since we have some new organizations here, can you explain what the application process is for folks?
Yeah, so for those who want to get involved in the Providers Council, there is an application process. The application is pretty short and sweet. For those of you who are in the audience, it's pretty short. We tend to review those applications twice a year. If it's time sensitive and we need to get people involved sooner, we can add it to the agenda to do that. The thing that's important about Providers Council is a couple of things in terms of membership is obviously attendance, because it sets the quorum, and so if it's a part of quorum and you're not here, it makes it hard to meet that. Two, that you're a provider in Pinellas County, serving Pinellas County residents. Three, that if you are a service provider, that you are entering into HMIS, that you have a license and/or the ability to enter your data into HMIS, and that your most senior leader member, who's in Pinellas County, is the official member or designee for the Providers Council. According to the application in our charter, it really is the CEO, unless it's a larger organization like a statewide or regional organization, in which case the senior leadership team can decide who that is. You have to have full and final voting authority. So you're able to vote fully on behalf of your organization in order to participate. Does anybody have any questions about that? Anybody that's here? No? Anybody on the call have a question? Does that answer what you were?
Yes, thank you, April.
Okay, next up on the agenda is the update on the work group formed last meeting, and this is for informational purposes only. I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
So I just wanted to mention that the coordinated entry for family shelter work group has not started yet. So no one that asked to be a part of that hasn't been contacted. We started having this conversation because of the lack of family shelter in our community. We had found examples across the country where they were doing coordinated entry for family shelter, and on an additional landscape scan, cannot find anybody who is still doing it. So maybe it didn't work. We're trying to get some more information before we pull that group together. And then I'm going to ask Avery to talk a little bit about what's going on with the VI-SPDAT assessment.
So the coordinated entry assessment work group had their first meeting, and it was extremely productive and very vocal, and it brought out some excellent communications in regards to what is it that we want to look at when we're looking at vulnerabilities in the COC. I believe that April pointed it best when we say all homeless have vulnerabilities. What is the urgency though? And that's what we need to be looking for. We did do a very thorough search of assessments. There's no one particular assessment that does everything we want it to do. So we're here. We did get the approval from the Foundation for Healthy St. Petersburg to hire a consultant. That consultant will work hand in hand with the work group, do research, communicate with COCs across the country, because we are not alone in this search, and find out what's going on and then make recommendations from there. The work group's next meeting is in July, and it will be taking a look at the current VI-SPDAT. Why is it being sunsetted? Why isn't it being successful? What are we finding here within our COC with our data? So we'll be looking at HMIS data, and then we'll also be looking at the full SPDAT tool. And then the next work group would be the data system performance.
Can I speak about the VI-SPDAT? So the VI-SPDAT work group, you were there, weren't you? Yeah. So the VI-SPDAT work group was, I agree with what Avery said. It was very well attended. If you weren't there, you didn't have somebody representing there, I would encourage you to get involved in this work group. I will say, that I wasn't completely convinced, that the entire committee was convinced that we actually need a different tool, that we need a different VI-SPDAT tool. As we all know, there's been some recent evidence that there is some bias that is not just racial bias, but trauma bias as well, just in terms of how those questions read. I think it was Kevin from Foley who pointed out that, how are those questions being read is also, it's not necessarily the question itself, it's how the question is being read. We've gone around and around on, is everybody trained in VI-SPDAT? Do we only have a handful of people who are trained? There are pros and cons to both of those things, but I do think that we all have to just continue to remember that if you, just like Avery said, if you are homeless, you are vulnerable. By definition, you are vulnerable. The question is the urgency in which we need to get you off the streets is what we're trying to determine, is the urgency in which we need to respond to your homelessness. That's what we're trying to figure out with the right tool, and if we have to create the tool with the and that kind of thing, the fear is that how long would that take, you know, and what are we missing in the meantime? And what can we do in the meantime to ensure that we are all responding with the right level of urgency to individuals and families who are living on the streets. And I personally think that we aren't responding with enough urgency when it comes to the elderly, when it comes to people who live with complex mental health and substance use disorders, and obviously families. So anyway, I just want to encourage everybody to get involved in this committee, because I just think it's just so critically important to what we're all trying to accomplish.
I do want to just kind of piggyback on that for a second. So a couple things that the committee decided was additional training needed, again, in the meantime, until a new tool is created, determined, so that bias of a assessor could not come out, right? So that those trainings are being discussed. You also asked at this last committee meeting to have a list of how many VI SPDATs are being conducted as a COC and how many assessors we have, so you could determine if we needed to get more people trained in that. Those are hyperlinks in your agenda so that you have those reports. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that. It's at the bottom under information. The last thing I would kind of say is, you know, we don't have to have one tool. Some COCs use multiple tools. You can add tiebreaker points to the VI SPDAT, and you can have other assessments. So for those of you who are new and don't really know what the VI SPDAT is, because we use a lot of acronyms, it's the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Assessment Tool. If we had all the resources in the world, we wouldn't need a prioritization tool. But because we don't, we are required by HUD to prioritize who is the most vulnerable and house them first. And we have to have a tool to do that. So just wanted to make sure that that was understood.
I will say that this list that Avery referenced about sending out, doing this comprehensive review of the tools that are available, I did quite a bit of research into those tools myself in advance of the meeting. I personally liked the vulnerability assessment tool, the VAT. I thought it was the most, I don't know what, and they listed the advantages and the disadvantages of each of the tools. I don't know if you guys have reviewed them or not, but the VAT I thought was pretty darn good. So anyway, I'll just say that I want everybody to get involved in this discussion. It really is probably the most important thing, in my opinion, in terms of how we're getting our hands around vulnerability.
And I will say, I will put out a plea that the committee is also looking for those with lived experience to join the committee. Those who have had a VI SPDAT and have been housed based on that.
I will also say to this conversation that we've talked a little bit about ACE. And, you know, there's pros and cons around ACE, but around ACE's adverse childhood experiences and the score of ACEs. But I have to say to you that, you know, some of the work that we were doing at Directions for Living is trying to compare the VI SPDAT score to an ACE score to see if there was any relationship between the two. Because we certainly know ACE, right, is evidence-based, it's research supported, it's undeniably relevant and important to what we're trying to do in terms of determining vulnerability, right? If you have an ACE score of 10, you know, by definition, you know, you're highly vulnerable because of your trauma history. I will tell you that when we looked at trying to compare the VI SPDAT score with the ACE score, there didn't seem to be a lot of relationship. So for example, you might have a 3 on the VI SPDAT, which for those of you who are new might suggest that you can self-resolve yourself, that your vulnerability is pretty low. But that same individual had an ACE score of 8, which would suggest that they have experienced extraordinary childhood trauma and are incredibly vulnerable to mental health concerns, substance use concerns, and primary health concerns, quite frankly. So that was just interesting to me. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I think ACE, of course, I'm always going to be advocating, because I think ACE should be a part of whatever tool we use, which is just your childhood exposure to to trauma. All right, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Finally, the last work group that had been up and running was a hybrid of the Funders Council and the Data System Performance. And what they were looking at were system-wide benchmarks that could be applied in future contracts, so that there's some commonality amongst local funders. So where they ended up with their next steps is there is a data dashboard that's live on the HLA website. And this dashboard, you can find everything that you need to know based on every quarter. And a lot of providers and the funders don't know how to utilize this. So we are going to put together a training in regards to how do you use the dashboard. That will be open to everybody once Brian does it. And then we're going to do a short tutorial that will be live on that website. Then the funders narrowed it down to what they're going to look at are the current COC benchmarks per project for exits, returns, and incomes. And that's where they're going to look. And so that work group is not meeting again unless it absolutely needs to. Teresa.
Just a comment that not all funders currently have licenses or have in the past had interest based on advice from our legal staff about having access to HMIS.
For the dashboard, you do not need a HMIS access.
It's right on our website.
It's right on our website. The
Okay.
data comes from HMIS.
All right, thank you.
And it breaks down all different ways. It was a request from Funders Council, so you can see what they're looking at. You can look at your individual project. You can compare yourself to other projects. You can break entries and exits down by race, demographics, gender, veteran. So it's pretty dynamic. So that's why we want to do a training for you all.
Yeah, I don't think I realized that existed. How long has it been there?
We've shown it in a board meeting
guys asked
before.
It's been a while. It's
We've
been out
shown it in
for-
a board meeting before, back when we were at Hospice, so at least 2 years ago.
Do you want to give us the update here, Amy, for ERA and
Sure. The ERA process with the county continues. I know that they are, I don't think I see anybody on from JWB, but I know they are working on a data sharing agreement right now in order to have FSI navigators assist families in completing those applications. But I did want to give everybody a brief update on emergency housing vouchers. So as a part of ARPA, there are about 210 vouchers that will come to this continuum of care for homeless individuals. Each housing authority is getting a slightly different amount. I want to say in Clearwater is 29, maybe 70 something in St. Pete, and 100 and something in Pinellas County. So we've been meeting to determine what the preferences and priorities will be for that. We have to have an MOU signed by the end of this month in order for them to accept those. Right now, it looks like they will accept individuals or families. They are looking for somebody scoring in the rapid rehousing range for people who are literally homeless. For prevention, because prevention is a requirement of this program. If somebody is enrolled in the eviction diversion program and doesn't have sustainability and needs new housing, that's mostly our seniors, they would qualify under the prevention guidelines. And then if you have someone currently in rapid rehousing that isn't meeting sustainability and maybe would do better with a long-term voucher, you could refer them for what we're calling lease in place, where maybe they can even stay in their own place if we can convince their landlord to take the voucher. So we'll be getting all of that together. We are still negotiating who will do the housing navigation on that, which is required by HUD. And we'll launch it as soon as we have all the details, but I did want everybody to know to be looking for that in July, because it's a huge resource that we are so excited to be able to have. all 3 housing authorities have removed service areas, I'll call it. So normally Clearwater Housing Authority does not let you leave Clearwater with your voucher. They will do that. So anyone can use their voucher regardless of who issues it across Pinellas County. They will also all have the same incentive guidelines. So they're working through that as a team right now. Our last discussion was probably 2 months rent incentive for landlords, 2 months deposit, and then they could also pay utility deposits. The great thing about pairing this with rapid rehousing is the ability for the rapid rehousing provider to then, if they have utility arrears or other things, they can layer those subsidies on top of each other.
I have a question for you. How's the VIP program going? The vouchers that the house in St. Pete and Pinellas County have?
So I'm not prepared to talk numbers about that today, Teresa, but I can tell you we started these meetings with kind of lessons learned from the VIP program. For those who don't know, that's actually called a mainstream voucher, and it's for people 18 to 61 who also have a disability and have children. There were no complaints. Everyone seemed to think that was going really, really well. We do have somebody on the call from Pinellas County Housing Authority if she wants to weigh in on that, but as a whole, I got the feedback that that process was going well. And I think we're gonna open up the flow a little bit more.
I only ask because I know that there's several clients in the collaborative rapid rehousing program, and we meet every 2 weeks, and it seems that there's, in terms of process, getting folks through that, particularly some of the clients that have been in the rapid rehousing program for, in some cases, well over a year. They obviously need the ongoing subsidizing of their housing expenses, and rapid rehousing not intended to be ongoing forever. And I'm just wondering if the processing of those clients is moving along as smoothly as it should.
I mean, I would ask Susan, who's on the call, or Elisa to answer that. What I am gonna guess, based on all the conversations we have had, all of them are inspecting units within a couple of days. And we have not heard of any backup with interview processes or other things. What I can tell you is that the housing market is very tight at this point, and so finding people who are, when you've got 500 phone calls from somebody, you don't need somebody with a voucher, right? So I could guess that could be challenging. And if you're already in a unit, trying to transfer that then to leasing in place could also be challenging. But I'd ask if Elisa or Susan have anything else to add to that.
Yes, currently right now, Amy, we have about 48 referrals, some that came off of our wait list and some that came from agencies. They've been briefed and they've got their vouchers, and it's just a matter of finding a unit out in the community. We've probably leased up 3 so far since about 2 months now. The difficulty is the access to units.
Yeah, and I think Amy and Elise have covered that well, thank you. I know it was a little slow starting, but they do have a process in place now.
I'm actually referring to those that are already housed. When I prefaced it saying those that we are paying, have been paying in some cases well over a year, and they're currently housed, and they need that voucher to carry them forward, or else we'll continue to pay for the rapid housing.
From my understanding, and again, St. Pete and Pinellas County are different. They both have mainstream vouchers. We know of no backups in processing them. The landlord does not have to accept the voucher even when they are currently in that unit. So that would be a negotiation process that the rapid rehousing provider would be responsible for coordinating.
And Teresa, I would also add that, you know, that there has to be a disability attached, and right now that they have, the family or individual has to have a certain VI SPDAT score. But as Amy mentioned, we might look at lowering that to have more people be eligible to apply for the vouchers.
Okay,
What we're having folks panicking about is not being able to use their vouchers and losing them possibly, and what's being done, because we all know that there's a housing shortage crisis, not a matter of not trying, and again, because they can do it another way because there's so much demand. So I don't know what's being said, because whether there's a process or not, if there's not the places, and how, I don't know, Elisa, if you can answer how you all are handling if their voucher is timed out. Are they being extended if it's a matter of not finding anything?
Yes, currently right now, HUD has given us waivers for normal 60 days, 120. We can extend vouchers further out because of the COVID, and that waiver has not been lifted as of yet.
So that would be the same with all housing authorities?
Yes.
Is it do they
Absolutely.
have, or is it their choice if they extend it out?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch it.
I said, because we have different housing authorities, are they mandated to extend it or I'm sorry, yes?
Yes, they have the waiver, and each housing authority should be following those waivers that HUD gave out. There's many waivers. Besides that, it was HQS gathering data. We can waive some of the data that they need to present in order to get them housed. And the waiver for extension of vouchers is available.
That's good to know that that's available.
Amy, with the vouchers though, not the VIP vouchers, but the other vouchers that you were talking about in the MOU and all that, when I was reading the guidance document on that, I couldn't tell if it clearly stated that the COC needed to have the MOU with the housing authority kind of thing. Is it true though that providers then don't have to have any additional anything in place, right? Because it will go through a process, whatever it is that you guys are coming up with, that then providers would be able to help advocate and/or.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the current MOU outlines, the coordinated entry manager at the COC does this. The rapid rehousing case manager will do the things that a rapid rehousing case manager would normally do. So there's not new responsibilities, but we just kind of outlined, here's what the housing authority does, here's what a rapid rehousing case manager does, here's what the COC will do.
And a disability is not going to be required for these vouchers. And is there any evidence to show that the 2 months of incentive is actually helping to attract new landlords?
So the St. Pete Housing Authority actually reported that they're using less than 2 months with like 60% success rate for leasing in place. So that's why they're going back to the drawing board, because each voucher comes with $3,500 that they've got to split a bunch of different ways. And so for St. Pete, what they were doing is 400 in normal area and 600 incentive in a non-poverty zip code. And so, they were having a lot of success at that amount.
And is the incentive not pay, the landlord doesn't have to pay that money back, it doesn't go towards rent, it doesn't go towards security, it literally is cash to them as an incentive?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any other questions about the vouchers?
No, I'm just worried about what happens to these folks, because they're transportation disadvantaged, they're doing all this stuff, and I don't know if there is an answer, but we need to realize that there's going to be all that extra stress on top of just normal stresses of trying to find housing, but and they're in the panicking,
I mean, I can tell you, Jane, that I've asked to bring source of income non-discrimination ordinance back for the city of St. Pete anyway in September. I asked months ago, September is the soonest the committee will hear it again. We will need COC support of the importance of, you know, landlords accepting vouchers in order for these to be fully utilized in our community.
Because I know, you know, even without, people without vouchers, when a lot of lower income folks leases up,
Yeah.
the incentive is to not renew it or to jack the price way up because they can get it right now. So that's another whammy to struggle.
You know, one of the things that Built for Zero kind of articulated, and I don't know the answer for our area, I don't know if you do, Amy, is, you know, the number of units available compared to the number of people who need units. Like, do we know in any way, shape, or form what that is?
We do not have all of that data yet, and that's kind of the first step of Built for Zero.
Oh, it is, okay. So, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, back to your question, I mean, I certainly know and agree, and everybody is saying, right, that affordable housing, where there isn't affordable housing, I want to know if there's housing. Regardless of how much people are charging for it, do we actually have enough housing for the people who need housing?
That information is available through the Schönberg Center, and the answer is no.
The answer is no?
The answer is no.
Because I remember Commissioner Seal at a juvenile welfare board meeting saying that she had looked at analysis, and I don't remember the specifics, but it was something like, we needed 4,200 more housing units. And it might have been affordable housing units, but I don't even know what that means anymore, affordable housing, I don't even know what that means anymore. But 4,200 units that were needed in order to meet the housing demand, the housing needs.
And that was prior to COVID.
Correct.
When we had all these people that are coming from other states
That was just for families
that
too, right?
have decided because we're an open state that they're moving here from California, New York, et cetera. So
Housing is the solution to homelessness.
I'm sorry.
Housing is the solution to homelessness.
Right, where's GW, right, when we need them, GW's been saying that forever, right, we need housing, right, we can talk about all the other stuff, but we need housing.
Yeah, and how are we gonna do that, especially when there's monetary incentive for the people in control of that?
Yeah. Okay, next up on the agenda is case conferencing policy, and I'll turn that over to Amy.
Okay, I think Avery has a presentation for us. This comes out of the rapid rehousing work group, so they have reviewed it. We did tell them at the end of that session to please get with their CEOs and decision makers. If they weren't comfortable with giving us that feedback, so that you would all be prepared to give feedback today. This originally came to providers before, right? Or was that the right calculation? And, you know, there was some discomfort. It got referred to the rapid rehousing group. Rapid rehousing group had no feedback. So you are seeing the same version again and again. We really tried to press upon your direct service workers. If they had feedback and they weren't comfortable giving it to us, they needed to make sure they got with their CEOs, because a decision would be made at this meeting today. So there's a couple of different tiers of case conferencing. I'm not going to read these policies to you, but you can see there are 4 types. Many of you are familiar with the by name list meetings that happen regularly. The second type is the responsibility of the rapid rehousing provider, and that is case coordination when, you know, clients are dually enrolled or other things. So rapid rehousing provider would call emergency shelter provider case manager and say, we're going to sit down and talk about Jane, and we need to work through any housing concerns, barriers, that kind of thing. In tier 3, this is led by the COC. We're gonna call this one mediation case conferencing. We will do that within 72 business hours of request. That's when there's some kind of challenge that the two providers can't work through together, or we need to elevate and have more folks in the room to help solve. And then tier 4 comes from a motion made at this committee last time you met, which was emergency case conferencing, not case constellation. And that is when we have a family on the street, you know, later in the day that needs some support. So we wrote that to after business hours up to 6 p.m. And we've used that a couple of times so far with success. So I want to thank those who have participated in that. I really think that the fact that that motion came out of Providers Council, folks provided their numbers. We've done it a few times and been able to keep people, even if it was temporarily, right? On a Friday before a holiday weekend, it gave time for providers to come together and make a better solution.
Can I say something to that? One of the struggles that we're having is nobody at Daystar has a agency cell phone. And Maria uses hers quite a bit. She's the lead contact, as you know, and she answers way too many calls on the weekends anyway. So we're trying to work that out, but I don't want her giving out her phone number. Although we ask people not to share, it gets out there and it's happened to everybody, not just, you know, not just us. So that's the reason we haven't been in it, but she answers her phone when it's there. We're just trying to protect her too.
What's the barrier to an agency issued cell phone? Is it the cost? Is it?
Well, I think I've tried it a few different ways. It's, and you all have boards, so you know, which I didn't. I thought it was a no-brainer, but that's my opinion. You need to put that in writing. Maybe not no-brainer, but it's just, well, if we give it to one, we have to give it to everyone. And it's like, well, no, not everybody has to be available by a cell phone. So what we're gonna do is have a designated phone line different than her office number that will be answered when Maria's on vacation or whatever, because of course y'all know we only have 4.5 staff. So so that's what we're trying to set up right now, because it would still be there. It wouldn't be a portable phone, you know, a walk around phone, but it would still be answered. Because we get a lot of those Friday afternoon calls.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, in our best interest to do this.
Okay, go ahead, Amy.
This slide just shows you what is expected post-case conferencing so that there's action-oriented follow-up and what that would look like.
On the emergency, on tier 4, the emergency case consultation, how did we get to 6 p.m., for example?
I made it up, to be honest. Most agencies don't work past 5 p.m. and it felt like, you know, having some kind of, a lot of agencies express challenge around not being contracted to be on off after hours. And so I felt like it gave us that window. I can also just say from experience, usually we know by like 4:30, 5:30. So I know like the recent one I participated in, I think we did till 7:30, but we started at 5:30.
Yeah.
So it just felt like a good
Okay.
kind of after 6 p.m. people could free up their staff members.
What we get those calls a lot, and what something happens, and I'm glad it's at least extended, because you're waiting for a couple of people to get back to you to know what's happening, to know if, especially if it's somebody sitting in our lot or sitting not in our lobby right now, but outside waiting for an answer. And just to know, do we need to dip into unrestricted monies to put somebody in a motel, which isn't something we normally do? Or is this going to be taken care of because it'll be, well, we think we'll be able to get them in and to wait so we can use that money for somebody else? Because it's not designated money from any particular source, except if we have the donations, we'll do it.
Right. I mean, I think in general, most people are pretty flexible. I think it's helpful as a person myself to just, if I could tell somebody at 4:30, hey, I need you to stay a little bit late. In all the cases that have risen up to me, we've had some idea earlier in the day, even if it was 5:30, that we're trying to work through something, right? So, that certainly can change. Just figured it was helpful to have a starting point.
That makes sense.
Okay, I don't know about anybody else, but I did not get any feedback from my staff on this, as Amy indicated that they were, right, that our staff have all been informed of these tiers, and if they had concerns to bring them up through their CEOs. I did not get any information from anybody that would indicate we need to change anything. We are looking for action on this today, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so
Move approval.
Second.
I have a motion to approve in a second. Is there any discussion or further discussion on case consultation, the various tiers and the responsibilities associated? Anybody on Zoom that has a question or a comment?
I just have one question, this monthly data review, and is that gonna be the HLA?
Yes.
Okay.
That is an internal
will
HLA.
review it monthly, all right, thank you.
And that's been happening for years, just so everybody knows. There's a monthly all-day meeting with HLA staff to review data and look at trends and challenges and things that data may be telling us. And then we take that information and share it back out to you through meetings like today.
Okay.
Madam Chair, and I assume that going forward, that after a length of time, a year, that we'll be looking at this procedure and see what needs to be tweaked.
Absolutely, Gary. So you'll remember that coordinated entry policies, CSC policies, charters, all of those things are required to be updated annually. That was one of my promises to you guys that had not been happening. And so there will be a year look at everything again.
I am grateful that, we finally have this process in place and documented, and that we're doing it. To Amy's point, I've been involved in a couple of the emergency case conferencing, and they've been highly successful and productive around, we're not leaving people on the streets, we're not leaving families with vulnerable children, little children on the streets, or putting them on the streets because there's a disruption with the placement. What can we do? And people coming together to solve it has been really, really helpful in my opinion. So.
I do have to say, this is something, again, we'll have to look at and tweak. In a few that I've participated in, I feel like the success has been the success because staff tried to negotiate those things, were unable to, and then CEOs all got on the phone together.
Yeah.
So this might not work out that your direct service staff have agreed to do this. Because in quite a few cases, it has taken all the CEOs sitting down and saying, okay, you're going to take this part of the risk. I'm going to take this part of the risk. This is what we're going to do on Tuesday. This is what we're doing for you this weekend. That wasn't something that other staff maybe could have negotiated as successfully. That's just my opinion.
I agree.
Just a comment, I know for the most part, at least since I've been involved, the focus for this type of activity has been primarily related to families with minor children. I've been getting more and more calls from seniors, and I know that the COC board has prioritized seniors, so I don't know if we're starting to look at the possibility of seniors. I mean, there's some that have pretty significant health conditions as well as concerns about going to Safe Harbor. You know, a lot of times that's what's available to, because of not only their health, but because of how they are, you know, what's the living conditions. Even can also, you know, with some of them have health conditions that lying on a pallet is not necessary. So I hope that we'll start to look at, since we're prioritizing them, that I won't handle those instances.
Avery, off the top of your head, or maybe if you go back a slide, it will tell us, but I don't remember that we said it had to be for families
No, it is not.
specifically.
This is household with minors and individuals. We included everyone.
So if there, I mean, normally what we say about individuals is there's always individual shelter.
Right.
But if there is an advanced vulnerability, I think there's the ability for us to use this policy and have a conversation about what needs to take place.
I agree, and I think we should be, and I've, you know, with street outreach in particular, as you know, what we have is jurisdictional street outreach at this point, but within jurisdictional street outreach, we do still have three priorities, one being families with minor children, the second being the elderly over the age of 60, I think, or 62, and then of course the third being individuals with a complex mental health condition that is absolutely getting in the way with them of them being able to be stable at Pinellas Hope or Safe Harbor. You know, they can't live within that environment well, that we are serving them, again, back to the urgency in which we need to serve them. In my mind, all three of them are pretty urgent. You know, we looked at the data fairly recently about elderly. And so you'll remember, many of you will remember 2 years ago when we had the conversation about the elderly, I think there were 40 individuals over the age of 65 or something, living homeless that was in our system. That number is now, if I'm remembering correctly, it's like 160. It's like quadrupled with the individuals that we know who are over the age of 62 or 65 kind of thing. So,
Zach had good numbers on that out at your place. I know you came up with a lot of those numbers.
Yeah, I pulled them, if I knew we were gonna talk about it, I'd pull them up that day, but just anecdotally, we're probably 100. I mean, we're only running half capacity right now, and I bet you 40 of them are over 65.
really?
Yeah, and that was a trend, that was a building trend before COVID.
It's continuing to go up, correct, Avery?
Yes, it is.
And so the question becomes, how do we, and as a system or as a continuum, prioritizing those individuals for vouchers, for example, you know, is that a possibility?
We had that discussion and it was decided against.
Okay, next up is rent calculation policy. Did I do the vote? Okay, I'm sorry. All those in favor on case conferencing policy, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Very good. Motion passes. Thank you. Next up on the
Wait, from
agenda,
Margie's minutes, do you know who said no?
I'm not doing minutes.
Or did everybody say yes?
everybody said yes.
Okay.
That was me, Amy, saying yes because I was trying to unmute.
Okay, I was just making sure.
Okay, rent calculation policy.
Okay, this is what you definitely wanted brought back to you after we had met with the rapid rehousing providers. And you had asked for some clarifications to be made within that policy. So your clarifications are within there. We presented this and we asked for feedback. There was no feedback given at all on these, with the exception of, I did hear from 2 providers. We gave them sample templates to use to figure out rent calculations, and WestCare and CASA got back to me late last night and said, we like it, it's working great, we don't care which tool you go with, both work fine. So overall, what you should know about the rent calculation policy, it's looking at a progressive approach in regards to having households just contribute to the monthly rent payment. These need to be flexible You need to consider each individual. Every household is its own. The process needs to be universal and consistently applied across all participants.
Michael replies that.
And then each project needs to have the payment process documented within their project policies and procedures. There does need to be a waiver included within your individual project policies and procedures so that if something were to happen and a client could not make a rent payment, they have the option to file with you to say, I need help this month, and this is why. If it's in where they're paying. We changed this up when we looked at doing it through a declining subsidy. So months 1 and 2, the project's paying for it. In month 2, that housing plan should be done. That's going to outline the budgets. Then beginning in month 3, the payments would start. Month 4 and 5 remain the same constant to where month 6, the client is hopefully taking on a bulk of that. Now, we do know, again, there are some households that won't be able to do this. That's where this case conferencing policy plays hand in hand with this. Working with everyone, providing those wraparound services to see what is it that we need to support this client. Is it a voucher? Is it saying we really need permanent supportive housing for this family or this individual? There's just no way. The VI SPDAT score didn't accurately measure it, or they scored in PSH range, but they accepted rapid rehousing and they're just not going to be successful in this. That's when we go hand in hand with that, and that's why you need to have that waiver exception within your policies and procedures, and it's in this. And then what the policy provides is actually 2 different samples. I only gave you one today to show you. So it helps them break down. And within this policy, we did supply the case managers with the Pinellas County Housing Authority utility allowances so that they've got a copy of that, as well as an Excel worksheet that will break this down for them. It does it for them. And again, we gave them 2 different options to look at. I only heard from 2 projects and they said either one is fine.
So let me ask you a question. We're taking action on this today, is that right?
Yes.
All right, so do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move for purpose of starting a discussion.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Teresa. I had questions
Well,
too.
you know, I'm just sitting here as a funder of a rapid rehousing program that's been in existence now for at least almost 4 years, and have been witnessing the provider submitting temporary financial assistance approval requests for clients that commit to pay based on their incomes, and even more so now with the influx of additional funds that are coming into families because of COVID. And there's been lots of instances where clients will commit that, yes, I'm gonna pay this portion of the rent. And inevitably before the next month, we find out the client did not pay that portion of the rent. So now we got that late fees plus the current amount. And one case that comes to mind is a family who was housed, received over $6,000 in the rescue fund stimulus checks, was expecting another $3,000 in income tax refund. And the request came in to pay her rent for $650 because she was refusing to pay with almost $10,000 in her hands, any of her rent. So my question is, how do you handle those failures to live up to what this calculations are and what they commit to do?
Without a legitimate.
And that's, I mean, and without a legitimate reason
Is that
for
a,
it.
is that
And that
a,
happens more than once.
I was
That's
gonna
just
ask you, is that a one-off or are you seeing trend behavior where, you know,
where
there's
people have
many
got
people
this,
doing that?
where they've gotten accustomed, in my opinion, to the programs paying their rent. They're employed or have gained employment, have have gotten the, Social Security or SSDI. And they commit to, yes, first they start with the utilities under the program currently. And then when it starts to be, well, we're gonna pay our rent, and this is happening also with recidivized clients, that we've housed them more than once. So I'm just throwing that out from practical experience, and that's what we've seen. I don't know what's happening with the other rapid rehousing programs, but ours is sort of the collab is sort of the most liberal, if you will, program in terms of how it's administered and how we will allow folks to, well, I know HUD's is what, 24 months? Ours is supposed to be 6 months, but I'm seeing cases, and I'll give COVID some of that credit, cases 15 months, 12 months and longer, and they're still not self-sufficient.
Or able to pay even a portion of their rents?
Or when my issue is when they make the commitment, I'm gonna pay this portion, and then they don't. And then we find out they have the resources to do so.
So this policy here is probably not designed to address that issue.
Correct.
Which is, because if I remember correctly, this policy was being drafted because we had such a disparity, if you will, in what our rapid rehousing providers were expecting or requiring people to pay.
It was drafted for two reasons.
Okay.
One is because we don't have a policy and HUD requires it.
Yes.
The second reason is because there was a disparity between providers. I did want to follow up on what Teresa asked though, because you may not have heard Avery say before you asked the question that whenever that can't happen, that is taken care of through case conferencing and a discussion. So there's, you know, every person in a system has to have individualized case management and planning. So we have to have a policy that we can apply to everybody the same way, but everybody needs to be treated as an individual, and so that would be worked out through case conference.
And just to follow up on what you said, I did hear her say that, but what I'm saying is that in practice, the case conferencing in the instance where I talked about the family with the almost $10,000 in resources at one, but the case conferencing came with, when I pushed back and said, no, I need more additional information. We're not going to pay this. Why is this client not? So I'm not certain who the case conferencing is being done by in that instance, other than the supervisor within the agency then spoke with the case manager and gave us more information. I'm just not certain. Is it suggested that the case conferencing would be, in that instance, who is it suggested case conferencing should be done with?
It looks to me like it would be a tier 2, maybe a provider case coordination, or even a mediation, a tier 3, a mediation case coordination.
Which then brings in the HLA, correct, if I remember correctly?
And the funder can be pulled in at that point.
April, on one, you have Nikki after Terry.
Okay, just taking another angle on it, and there's some extreme cases, and that sounds like one. But I know sometimes when people are in crisis, they pull out, just like all of us, I think, probably do when we go somewhere. We either hear only the bad stuff or only the good stuff. And I don't know how much time is put into this, because as I'm looking at these things, and if somebody has to have an income to make this kind of commitment, then how is it explained to them? Because I know that people, when they the food stamps, or SNAP benefits, they're getting the full amount while they're pending their SSI or something, and full amount of food stamps. And so when the check comes, of course, there's some adjustment. And we have to explain to them that you didn't have an income before, they said they take away my food stamps. You know, it's like they take this away. So I don't know how we can prepare people for this, because I know there's a lot of work being done again on banking, St. Pete, or what is it, Bank St.
Bank
Pete?
on St.
Bank on, that's the word. Look, but some way that people can save, because there are some no fees things without jeopardizing, if it's an income-based kind, I mean, asset-based kind of program that they get their income from. But how can we help them understand how they can prepare for this as they go down? Because as we're looking, it's just wishful thinking. So yeah, Gary, you have a lot of experience with this stuff.
Well, I don't deal with the rapid rehousing folks, but I have a problem with where we think these folks in 5 months will be able to afford $552 a month in rent. Based on that income of $12,000, they can afford $300. I don't know what happens in a 5-month period where all of a sudden they can pay double of affordability for themselves.
I can respond to Jane's and then we can go back to Gary's real quick. Jane?
Nikki, you're next.
From the minute that a client comes in to coordinated entry and is BI SPDATed, a BI SPDATed assessor's role is to explain that you're going to be referred to a project. One of those projects could be rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing provides short-term to medium-term financial assistance. It is not ongoing financial assistance. So therefore, it's the assessor's responsibility to ensure that a client understands that.
That's the part that they might be nodding their head because that happens.
So then, once that person's referred, that case manager needs to be doing that progressive engagement, ongoing and working with it. People with zero income can come into rapid rehousing. And that's why we have that flexibility waiver within this policy, where if they can't, it takes a long time sometimes for benefits to get up there and running. It may take a client multiple months to find a job because they're going through workforce development or education. So that's why there's this flexibility there for that. And then for Gary, this is just what was recommended as a best practice across the country. If you would like that edited,
well,
you can make that recommendation to us today.
Yeah, but the problem with this isn't necessarily the issue, it's the example, right? So what
I may have thrown y'all off. I asked Avery to provide a real life example.
Okay.
So you could see numbers, because last time people were trying to calculate numbers by percentages and they couldn't do it in the middle of the meeting.
But they say that, I mean, national best practice, right, is 30% of your income, no more than 30% of your income is going toward your housing, right?
Housing costs.
Housing costs.
Not just housing.
Not just housing, but your housing costs, right? That's true for all of us. All of us should, if we are paying more than 30% of our income for our housing, we are already upside down, right? That's true for everybody. So if you flip to the example that you gave, right, to Gary's point, if this person's making $1,000 a month, they shouldn't be paying any more than $300 a month, including utilities in their housing costs.
So
we have them up at 500, say they're at 60% of their income. They automatically are going to need a voucher. Right this minute, I can tell you that family needs a voucher, that it's not sustainable. They will be homeless again quick.
And I want to say, and I don't quote me on it, but I will look at the policy really quickly. I believe we do have that stipulation in there. And then there is a second example that shows the cap at the 30%.
But I mean, I'm almost positive too that the policy states that. This though is a real life example from the collaborative, right? I know Teresa sends me examples all the time, and we are currently, all of our rapid rehousing providers are putting people in units that they are not going to be able to afford long term, because I mean, what do you find?
Because they aren't available.
They aren't available.
Back to what is affordable housing, right? What is affordable housing? Well, affordable housing for this individual is $300 a month.
40% of their.
Where is that? We don't have that. So of course they're going into something that costs $1,500 a month, which is more than they even made, right? And then when you get to the percentages that you have on the other page, that's where it becomes an issue. They're never gonna be able to pay 50%, 60%, 70%, 80% of that, because it will pretty quickly exceed their income altogether just for their housing.
And like I said, in the policy, again, don't quote me on this. If it's not there, I will make sure to add it. I believe that there is a little asterisk or something saying, you know, that if not, Amy, please let me know, so I'll add it.
Yeah, I'll check it
This is
while they
over
continue their
that
discussion.
percentage.
Have you tested the policy, like
It says it must-
taken it and given it to a provider? and
Yes, we,
tested?
every rapid rehousing provider was on that call.
No, but have they actually, I know they were on the call, I know they listened to it, but did they actually do a test and for like a couple months and see how it worked with the client?
I know
That's what I'm
that there are, because one of the questions that arose at the last providers meeting was how do landlords feel about getting two different checks? So I did do the research, and St. Vincent de Paul and Catholic Charities Rapid Rehousing Projects do have similar policies to this. And both projects said no landlord has ever questioned getting two. They're fine with it. It's in their
And
agreement.
that they're currently doing it.
They're currently doing it. So we do have projects out there that are doing.
The 30% is in there.
Yes.
So, excuse me.
Is it in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in March, what happens if the tenant doesn't pay its $187.50 and the program's still paying $560? This comes back to what Teresa was talking about, that people are, they're into the bargain. And just one other comment, I think 30% of the income, of the person's income is a fallacy in this market. I think a lot of our staff aren't paying 30% of their income, they're paying more. It's more like 45% of your income towards housing in this market now, which doesn't help our situation.
No, it doesn't. Mickey?
Thank you. So just a, quick dovetailing a little bit on to Teresa and several other providers. And, just a general question, because I want to be, as upfront with those providers of, if this is a policy we're looking to approve, what are potential consequences for a rapid rehousing provider if they don't meet this policy on an ongoing? Obviously, we're going to all be working together towards this. I just wonder, I know we talked about that this is a best practice. Is it a policy or best practice or both? Because many of the families that we see as the fiscal administrator for a rapid rehousing program, maybe this will work fine for January, February, but they're working January, February, March, April. Now they no longer have that job and they're back to, having no income coming in. So I'm just curious if they're not setting a policy that if they're going to be following this path and they don't follow the path, what happens? Just asking that question.
Those and provide some additional detail from the policy itself. So again, right now, rapid rehousing providers are already doing this, right? So Avery checked up on that. They are already applying this. This is formalizing the practice into a policy because we are out of compliance with HUD by not having a policy in place. So it's both. It is both a best practice and a policy. In addition to that, again, there's individualized case conferencing for every person. So if in March they don't meet their guideline, they should not be kicked out of the program. We should all be sitting down and figuring out what's going on. This is why we are pushing, formalizing a discussion about it's housing focused case management, right? We've talked about that over the years, but we are defining now what housing focused case management is, because this is the goals that have been set forth by HUD, not that we're focusing on, everything under the sun when many of our clients are complex. I just want to read the portion so everybody has some comfort with the language. It says that providers may consider a consistent subsidy with the tenant portion calculated based on income and the tenant paying no more than 30% of their income. So this again puts that in the provider's hands to determine. Jane's example may not be the best example in front of you. I just wanted you to have some real life numbers, but the provider has the ability to do that. And then to Mickey's question about, what happens if people aren't following this, my guess is that would be found in monitoring, and there would be a discussion about that. If they did use case conferencing and all the things that they had at their disposal, that would not be any challenge in their monitoring, correct, Avery?
No, that would be then, we would need to come back to the drawing board and see, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? What do we need to tweak in the process? Do we need to throw the process out? What needs to happen?
A question is HUD, when they monitor, are they only monitoring those programs that they fund?
HUD does not monitor, we monitor for HUD.
Okay, so, never mind, I'll withdraw my comment.
Karen, you're recognized.
Yeah, I just had a question. So I'm not trying to get like mired down in the examples that have been provided, but I keep hearing that if there's issues that are coming up with the payment, that you would use case conferencing. So then I went back to the case conferencing policy. I'm not seeing where the family is involved or the individual is involved in any of those case conferencing examples. So are all of those examples excluding the actual individual or family?
I think that's an excellent point, Karen. I think that's excellent, and I know it was approved. I can go back and add it.
Yeah, I don't think the family was intentionally left out, but it's a really good point, and if this body would like that, we can add them into.
You know what's interesting about that is one of the recent case conferences, emergency case conferences that we did, the housing provider got very nervous about the possibility of the client being on the call, if you remember correctly. Amy, do you remember that? Having the client on the call, what felt threatening to the housing provider, who wanted, I guess, to be able to speak freely and didn't feel like they could do that if the client was present. I tend to agree, obviously, with Karen's observation that, we shouldn't be doing any of these conversations without the client, especially in the scenario in which Teresa kind of outlined, which is that they made a commitment, they have the money, they're refusing to do it. I would much rather say we have an uncomfortable conversation with the client rather than kicking them out of their place of housing because we haven't had the discussion. So I would agree.
It sounds like the case conferencing, that you can really combat anything. If they can't make those payments, then you have the case conferencing because maybe they lost their job or whatever. And then you figure out consistent payments for a couple of months and then put them back on the plan again. So it sounds like it should work.
Having all the facts is what's important.
Yeah, because you're not holding them to one. Not one size fits
Well, I'm
all.
going to support this and call for a vote because it's the practice. And it's put out in spelling right now for us to look at, and I think COC, FOA is going to monitor it. Of course, the provider's going to monitor it, and we'll see how it goes. This is what we're doing, let's get it approved, so we're in good shape to go with it.
Okay, so we have a motion from Teresa, from Gary and Teresa and Jane. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes.
As the first on the case conferencing, I would amend my motion to include language that includes the client in it, and some factor that you could just bring back to us in the future.
Can you say that again, Gary?
Gary was the motioner for the case conferencing. He wants to amend that motion, and I can't remember who was the seconder. Do you remember? Was
Yeah, I
it-
have it. Find it. Gary and Jane.
Oh, and Jane? All right, well, Jane's on the phone.
Okay, I'm not far away.
Jane, are you willing to, Gary would like to go back and amend his motion around case conferencing to include the client being present for the case conference whenever.
I'm fine with that.
Are you willing to?
Yes.
Okay. Do I need to revote that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, with that amendment, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
You're gonna lose quorum.
How many?
You're gonna lose quorum.
Do I have anything else to vote on?
The rapid rehousing standards. No, that was information only.
Okay, that was it. Oh, I'm fine. I'm sorry, right? So- I'm fine. I have enough, yes.
Let me say real quick, Teresa's gonna take care of this for me, but this is the information on the new Flamingo card and how to use it with the PSTA. So, they're flyers, so you have them when you're getting ready to work with your clients. Because PSTA is trying to, gonna start charging again, but there's some changes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next up on the agenda is the rapid rehousing standards of care, and this is for informational purposes only. And I will turn this over to Amy or Avery.
Okay, so what you have in your packet is a draft, and it is a rough draft, and we are going to continue having this as a draft for a little while. It is literally just a way to bring commonality amongst all of our rapid rehousing providers. A majority of your providers already do a lot that's in there. This is just laying it all out, saying this is what's expected within rapid rehousing projects within the continuum of care. It also helps for new projects that want to come on board, new agencies that want to come on board for rapid rehousing. It will help give them a good outline. Standards of care are across the nation used by COCs, so I feel that this is a great start for us. You'll see other standards of care coming out for our other projects, permanent supportive housing, transitional housing. So this is just a start. It is going to be a live document. So as updates, as trends happen, we can amend it as we need to, as a continuum.
This was also presented at the Rapid Rehousing Workforce Group with no feedback.
Correct. However, the SPDAT case managers had a training this week and asked for some additional things to be added in. So I'll go ahead and do that.
So I just want to, this is for informational purposes only, so we're not taking a vote. But I just wanted to ask some questions about the prioritization standards for rapid rehousing. So can we kind of talk through that? Can you help me align in my head with the action, the prior action that we've taken both at the COC and at Providers Council around priority populations, families with dependent children, the elderly, that, so can you help me?
What is within the policy right now is from our coordinated entry.
Okay.
So it has not been updated until we get there. So really what you have in here, it goes much more in depth than coordinated entry in regards to prioritization. What I did here was just did a synopsis of it.
So April, I think the difference is, and I didn't know this until recently, that I guess at some point the COC voted on coordinated entry prioritization. And that's what you're saying here.
Yes.
When we have been voting on priority populations annually, that has been for funding purposes. And then that is not applied forward to coordinated entry.
Correct.
Yikes. So is that, but that's a goal that we would, or how, so, huh? Okay.
And if I could follow up on that, for example, 2019, we, as the city, when we had excessive still funding that we were rolling over for rapid rehousing, we made the decision to take some of those dollars and put in place a case management team as a piggyback onto the county's agreement with the provider to specifically address homeless individuals in St. Petersburg. And that was a decision we as a funder made. I mean, and that was, I think that, like Amy mentioned, that the decisions on the prioritizations have been related to how we determine our funding to address what we see as a need in the community. And within that, then as far as supporting the entry system, I think that they utilize whatever the policies are in terms of the VI-SPDAT score.
That's correct.
Et cetera, as well as things like veterans, being a veteran is a tiebreaker and some other things like that. Yes.
So remember when we voted on the VI SPDAT like a whole way long time ago? These are the priorities that were set for prioritization with that tool. I can tell you that we've passed a couple of new coordinated entry policies recently to get them going. Those are now being incorporated into the entire coordinated entry policies and procedures. That is slated to go to the full board October-ish, I think.
I believe so.
So it would come here first. So you could have the opportunity to have that discussion and determine you want that prioritization different, but that feels like that might be an appropriate discussion for that VI-SPDAT work group.
Yeah.
And then that could get incorporated in this and.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've got to get more alignment within the way this prioritization standards coordinated, you know, the CES list, these prioritization standards and priority populations. To me, there's just got to be an alignment somehow, or it just feels very unwieldy in terms of people on the front lines making decisions about who's getting what with what sense of urgency. This is confusing to me.
And if I might, I think the other consideration has got to be what our point in time count reflects. I mean, it reflects that our biggest issue in our community is homeless individuals. And we, based on our anecdotal comments, are saying that we're starting to see that those individuals are seniors, over 62, whatever. And for the most part, and I know, I don't know if Kevin's on the phone or not, but it's been said over the years that we're basically handling the issues as it relates to families. I don't know if that's the case now because of COVID, but I think you're gonna always hear me mention the individuals because.
Yeah, and I think that absolutely, you always do mention the individuals and I always mention the families, right?
Yeah.
So together we got it,
We're
we
the
got all of
advocates.
them. I think that the challenge is going to be around the vulnerability index, right? So from the lens I'm looking through is, yes, individuals on the street are absolutely vulnerable. It is with what urgency do we need to keep them safe? Is where I come back to is families with these little bitties are always going to be, in my opinion, more vulnerable or unsafe under the bridge than an individual that's 28 years old, single male, right? So do I want that 28-year-old single male off the streets and housed? Absolutely. If I can only house one of them, I'm taking the mom with the little bitty and getting her off the street first. So, I just want to make sure I'm being understood that I care about the individuals, men and women. If I believe, however, from a vulnerability standpoint, that they are likely to survive the night and keep themselves safe, and or they can go to Safe Harbor or Pinellas Hope, but the family can't, right? That's my challenge. Now, with the over 60s or over 65s, even if we said over 70s, over 75s, you know, we gotta pick a number and start saying, these are highly vulnerable elderly, and they aren't likely to survive the night on their own under a bridge, you know, and I agree that we need to prioritize them in particular differently. Okay, so there's nothing we need to do about this. We'll just keep working it.
Yep.
Okay. Let me get back to my agenda.
The next thing is JWB Family Programs update, but I do not see anybody here from JWB or online. If there is somebody online.
Jennifer, are you on the line?
Yeah, oh, sorry, wrong Jennifer.
Wrong Jennifer.
I can just give an update based on a conversation that was had this morning. I do know that they have recently signed a contract to add additional capacity to the Family Bridge housing program. So based on the numbers that were provided from John and Jana earlier this week, I believe that there is currently capacity in that program. So if anybody has any questions, there's nobody here to answer them, but I'm happy to try based on the conversation we had this morning.
Is that just paying for additional nights in the shelter, or is that?
Additional nights in
hotel?
shelter or hotel, or whatever's available.
With case management.
Right.
Yes.
So, you know, again, I don't want to speak for the Juvenile Welfare Board. I did happen to attend the last Funders Council meeting. I was very encouraged by what Jennifer from the Juvenile Welfare Board had to say. The one distinction that she made that I thought was helpful is that FSI and the funding that they're putting into temporary emergency shelter and bridge housing are two separate things. And that it is incredibly important for people to understand that you do not have to be an FSI or have even been screened for FSI to qualify for the emergency shelter bridge housing that is available through primarily, I think, or maybe even exclusively St. Vincent de Paul in contract with them.
It's not either or.
Right, it's not either or. So maybe we can get Jennifer on the, you know, on the agenda to make sure that she can give us the update. She provided quite a few updates that I was encouraged by. They are funding quite a bit with Child Protective Investigations. They're funding quite a bit with Eckerd Connects, the lead agency in child welfare. They're funding quite a bit with diversion services with Lutheran Services. It sounded to me like there was quite a bit of effort being made in those places to prevent and or divert families from entering homelessness that are also involved in the child welfare system.
In a prevention mode, right? So I know we've had conversations over time about whether JWB fits in the homeless space or not. They do see their role kind of walking up to that line in that prevention and diversion area. And they're working really hard to be in alignment with the COC and HLA. So we'll keep you posted, but I would agree with April's assessment that there's some promising updates there.
Yeah, we've been concerned, we at Directions for Living has been concerned for quite some time that there's been not clear pathways for child protective investigators to get their needs met. And so it feels to me like it's moving in the right direction for, at least for child welfare families and babies, and the separation between FSI and funding for emergency shelter and bridge housing, I think is a good progress. All right, next up on the agenda is the street outreach update. So I wanted to provide an update on street outreach. Many of you know that we've been trying to respond, we being Directions for Living as the street outreach provider under Pinellas County. There are other street outreach teams that certainly are working within the community. Right now, our street outreach teams are jurisdictional street outreach teams exclusively. We were trying to kind of walk two programs. We've kind of gotten out of that. We now have exclusively jurisdictional street outreach teams under the county funding in Pinellas Park, Lealman, St. Pete, and now Clearwater. So Clearwater had been dropped off as a jurisdictional street outreach team since last October. We've met with Chief Slaughter and the county. We've repurposed one staff member within street outreach so that there is now a jurisdictional street outreach team in Clearwater. We are in the process of hiring for that position. That position will be a 40-hour-a-week position with the city of Clearwater or Clearwater Police Department. So I expect that position will be full, within, 15 days, 30 days max to have somebody in position. In addition to that, under my street outreach contract, we are asked to get a consensus plan in place relative to what does our county need for street outreach. We've talked over the years that a dispatchable street outreach team was needed. There's been some conversation about, does that need to be paired with law enforcement? Could it be separate from law enforcement? What we've learned certainly throughout the pandemic is a couple of things. Street outreach is intended to be an access point and engagement. If we don't have any place to put them, it's not real helpful to have more access points and engagement. Even with that, I'm still of the opinion that we should have a dispatchable street outreach team that is countywide with one number to dispatch people from street outreach to individuals. But we also need additional shelter beds and/or housing if we're taking them off the streets. And then finally, we need case management attached to people once they're placed. That is not the role of street outreach. So I am preparing a document that will go to the county with this kind of information and/or reference. I have not met this year. I have not met with all of the law enforcement agencies with the exception of Largo and Clearwater to really talk with the law enforcement agencies about what they think the street outreach teams should look like. I can tell you that historically, over the past year and a half, it's been that they really want to keep their teams with law enforcement. I don't know what your opinion is of that, Teresa. Again, St. Petersburg is so big. St. Petersburg has a lot of resources right now, assuming that those resources will continue beyond September with call and PATH and other things. Do we need a jurisdictional street outreach team in St. Petersburg, or do we need a dispatchable street outreach team that can go anywhere, including St. Petersburg, is kind of the question that needs ultimately to be asked. It certainly won't be answered here today, but I don't know what your thought is on that, Teresa, in particular.
Well, I don't know that I have an answer to that. I think that I'm still trying to determine exactly how call is fitting into the picture. At this point, I don't think they're being dispatched with PATH officers any longer. Is that your understanding too, Amy?
That what?
That the pilot project where call was being dispatched with the PATH officers, I think that 90 days or whatever has ended, and now.
I believe that to be true.
But they are purely responding to calls that come into 911 or the non-emergency number, but homelessness is not their only issue. It's truancy, neighborhood disputes, those kinds of things. Right now, I don't even know who your staff member is that's with our person, because I think we've finally gotten away from the, who is this person? So I don't know the answer, April. I kind of am inclined to say that I don't know, I think I need to talk with our PATH folks. I mean, Sergeant Hilson and those have really gotten ingrained in being out in the streets on a constant basis. How successful I think they're pretty successful in getting folks into, that want to go to either Safe Harbor or Pinellas Hope. And I will personally be starting to understand how they get folks into Turning Point. That's been placed under my department now, that agreement for that placement. So, you know, I'm hesitant to say one way or the other whether we should continue it the way it is. I think that we've been interested in having a dispatch model. That's one reason why you heard me talk so much before about we used to be able to call Operation Farm staff and say so-and-so is called, can y'all make contact with them? But I don't know that that would be the best way to go or not.
So give that some thought. I think we just need to continue to advance the conversation. I will tell you that one of the challenges has been without for the PATH team and for other law enforcement agencies is that they don't have access to HMIS, and they are not either allowed or encouraged, I don't know what the word is, around getting a license and actually entering information in HMIS. So without HMIS data coming from law enforcement or people who are touching these individuals, we certainly would be at a disadvantage without having that data.
That's correct. So the COC made the decision, not I, the board, that law enforcement could not enter into HMIS. It's been brought up previously, so.
And so we could bring that up again. That issue is, or was, as a result of how that information would be used. Is that correct? That there was a fear attached to that information could be used for arrest purposes or for finding people to arrest them or somehow misusing the information of the
The
data.
other thing too is that our law enforcement folks are not going, like, for example, when there's no shelter space for these families, they're not going to place somebody in a motel because of the implications of that too, you know, so.
And so I will tell you to that fact, right, which is the reason we just kind of need to get on, you know, my frustration has been, I'll just continue to say what my frustration is, which is that jurisdictional street outreach teams are just that. If you are in St. Petersburg, the way things are done is different than if you were in Clearwater, which is different than if you were in Largo. I'll give you a perfect example to what you just said. City of Clearwater or Clearwater Police Department, every single one of their officers can place somebody in a hotel, can pay for it and put them in a hotel, do and will, right? City of St. Pete, that's not true. In Pinellas Park, it is sometimes done, but not always done because the street outreach staff person can do it. So, you know, the thing that I want to continue to advocate for is a consistency regardless of where you live. Because what we know about people who are living housing unstable and homeless is that they are transient. They're moving from one place to another. And if you can only get a particular service that you need in Largo, chances are everybody's going to Largo, and that's not really what we need to have happen in order to solve the problem. In any case, Zach.
So as far as access to HMIS, there's a handful of us that are sworn that have access to HMIS because we operate Safe Harbor. I'm unaware, I've been there for 8 years now, I'm unaware that any of us have used it for nefarious purposes or to round up a bunch of criminals. That's not what it's intended for. We break law enforcement's heart and piss them off every time they call looking for somebody. And I believe that Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office and Tampa PD, both their street outreach teams have access to the Unity system over in Hillsborough. So if that's a conversation, you can touch base with them and see what they feel like. As far as a centralized number, there's got to be a number that people can call almost 24 hours a day and have street outreach get dispatched out there. Now, it becomes complicated when you have jurisdictional boundaries because other than the sheriff's office, Largo's going to stay in the city of Largo, Pinellas Park's going to stay there, and St. Pete's going to stay in the city of St. Pete. But if your people, and I'm saying yours, but if directions people can go out there and make initial contact, and if it's, you know, if it's a safe situation, then cool. If it's not, then they stand by and wait for law enforcement. That sounds easy.
Yeah, which is the model, in fact, that we were, you know, that we had proposed and we were trying to move forward before really, we got sidelined with the pandemic and with some of the, you know, the injustice and issues that were happening across the country that really said, that put law enforcement and others on alert that said, you know, we really need to take a step back and try to look at things differently. I remain concerned about jurisdictional street outreach and the effectiveness. That it might be real effective for that particular city, that particular jurisdiction, but not necessarily. Like we have Gulfport and Bel Air and Treasure Island and
Kenneth City.
and Kenneth City, and you know we have and
Tarpon Springs.
Tarpon Springs, right? We've got a ton of areas that aren't currently covered.
How concerning is it to be able to hire and retain people that are willing to go out there and do that job without law enforcement?
You know, that's an excellent question. Historically, we have categorized those positions as very entry-level positions, and they came in at the kind of the bottom base salary for those positions. Recently, we have done an evaluation to say, really, we need to value experience more than we value degrees. I don't need you to have a master's degree to be on the street. I need you to have a whole lot of experience to be on this street, to know how to identify and recognize signs and symptoms and keep yourself safe and know when to call the police and all that. And as a result of that assessment, we've now changed our pay grade structure. It's now a $48,000 a year position. It values experience over degree. And moving forward, I don't think that we'll have a hard time finding people for those positions. Mickey, I'm interested. Are you still there, Mickey?
No, she's in monitoring right now, or accreditation, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, does anybody on the phone or on Zoom have anything that they would like to contribute or add to this conversation? Okay, hearing none, we will continue to move that ball down the field, so to speak. And the last thing on the agenda is the wrap up and next steps. So I'd like to hear anybody here or on the phone who has something they'd like to announce or address or discuss.
Well, I just want to hand out Jane's items here. It's to go, it's getting, it looks like you're doing away with the cards where you can get a 31-day bus pass or 10-day bus pass, and they're transitioning to this Go Flamingo, they meaning the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority. So that's what this flyer's about. That's all I know about it.
Okay, anything else from the group?
I may have to drop off the Data System Performance Committee due to scheduling issues. So if there's anybody else from shelter providers that wants to give up 2 hours of their life, hour and a half of their life, right, Avery?
Stop it, I may change the meetings just to keep it.
I told them working on it, but if there's any other family or if there's any other sheltering providers that.
I'm going to the chair to change the time in the day, trust me.
Somebody else might want a voice. I've been there for like 6 years.
Nope.
Nope, okay.
All right, anything else? Gabe, anything from you?
No, not at this point.
Okay, Sheila, anything from you? Anybody on the phone have an update or anything they would like to share? Anybody in the audience, anybody else today have anything you would like to share?
Yes.
Okay.
I have some cards I would like to pass out. It's a permanent housing facility, Southern Supportive Services, and it's for emergency-based we take the mentally ill, disability, and homeless, and recovering addicts, and we take it off of the streets. So I would like to give you a card.
And Southern Supportive Services.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Good of the order? Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, happy Father's Day to all our fathers. Happy
Thank you.
Juneteenth. for tomorrow, and thank everybody for being here.
What's up, man? Come on. Sometimes I don't see you, girl.